תודה רבה לך, חברת הכנסת לימור סון הר מלך. הדובר הבא, מר דוד בדין, מנהל המרכז לחקר מדיניות המזרח התיכון. בבקשה.
תודה רבה. I'll speak in English so it can be clear. I grew up in the United States, in Philadelphia, where I first met Frank Hunt, who was appointed by the American Friends Service Committee to handle UNRWA. And it was a humanitarian organization at the time. It was not a Zionist organization, but they did what they could to stop violence. And when I came to Israel in 1970, ever since I've been involved, and 7 years ago, in 1987, started an agency to investigate UNRWA. Until recently, I was talking about the reform of UNRWA. I cannot do that anymore after this war. The time has come for the government of Israel to declare the UNRWA not only in Gaza, but we've been filming. Our agency films the schools, films the UNRWA schools in Judea, Samaria, Jerusalem, and in Gaza. We have 4 Arab workers and 4 Jewish workers. We are prevented from making our case in Israel. We cannot get on television. We can't get into one university. And the one university that we did make a presentation, the whole thing is as if it didn't happen. We need the foreign press and the foreign diplomats to ask questions. You know, in the Bible, we have someone called Jethro, and he made sure that Moses would act correctly, and you are our Jethros. Okay, when you hear what I'm talking about, you can ask difficult questions, not on the nice people here, but the people who are welcoming Blinken this week to Israel and suggesting to him that Gaza be handed over to UNRWA. UNRWA is not only an anti-Semitic organization of hatred. No, it's much worse than that. Well, I have a book here, Roadblock to Peace. Every one of you, I have more copies upstairs. This is how the UNRWA perpetuates the Middle East conflict. Now, how do they get away with it? Well, the budget of $3.6 billion is used where? Mostly in the Israel economy, and people, are bought off. There's no other way to say it. We suggest examination of every organization that invests in UNRWA and gives to UNRWA. The redefinition of UNRWA as a hostile terrorist organization needs to be criminal responsible of the Commissioner General of UNRWA. I know I'm sitting next to a diplomat from Switzerland, Philip Lazzarini, who has conducted a criminal organization and with no accountability. We have to take Mr. Lazzarini very seriously, because if you look at the website, they have just responded to us when we showed our films. We have 24 films. We'd like to show them to all the embassies. And we're not allowed to do that in Israel. The TV knocks us out. We can't, but we have to go to the foreigners. The embassies play a very important role to get the truth out. We have to initiate a criminal investigation of UNRWA and their involvement in terrorist organizations. The commission, the research division of the Knesset, needs to gather evidence to present to the UN Secretary General with the war crimes of UNRWA. If they're going to deal with the Hague with a fake accusation against Israel, let's have some real accusations against what UNRWA is doing. Every employee of UNRWA who is a member of a terrorist organization has to be taken into account and indicted and possibly arrested. There's a whole generation that doesn't know the legacy of UNRWA. How was UNRWA started? We interviewed the family of Folk Bernadotte, Swedish diplomat, was later assassinated, who conceptualized the inalienable right of return to Palestine as a contrast to the Jewish concept of law of return. Now, what about UNHCR? We went to Geneva. We took our staff to New York. UNHCR cannot replace UNRWA because one UN agency cannot replace another. But what we can do, and the diplomats play a very, very important role, we can ask the UNRWA and demand that UNRWA replicate the principles of UNHCR and adapt that to the whole point. I'm a social work professional. That's how you have to work. You work inside the system. But there's no transparency of $1.6 billion coming in. The first investigation we did in the 1980s was the disappearance of money for medical equipment, which continues to disappear. And there's no one calling it. Why? Because the medical equipment is being, I am a loyal Israeli, but being sold to medical services in Israel. It's profitable. There are many people in Israel making money from the fact that they can get cheap medical equipment from UNRWA.
David, just to explain that so they don't think that Israel takes the equipment, is Hamas receive the equipment and then sells it to someone else. It can be in Israel, it can be foreign or anywhere else.
Correct. UNRWA receives the equipment and sends it abroad. Hamas working with the Palestinian Authority, it's one great partnership. And this is very important. It's not being investigated, and the other things which aren't being investigated, which can be, we have our films. We sent photographers to film the graffiti around the schools in Bethlehem. 915 pictures of murder, and the UNRWA takes no responsibility. UNRWA says we have nothing to do with it. These are kids who come out of schools where they learn that kind of art. The new school curriculum. There was a hope. In 2000, when there would be a new school curriculum, it would be one for peace. And many countries were involved in, and as a matter of fact, forgive me for insulting someone who's passed away, Shimon Peres said that there was a peace curriculum. It didn't exist. But look at it. Look at it for what it is. It's not a Hamas curriculum, it's a PA curriculum approved by all the donor countries. Now, last but not least, the gentleman who spoke before me, who was in the army. All the foreign government, we went to all the donors have gone to UNRWA. Do you know about weapons in the schools? Not one of them, they all denied it. Now it's real, and now people are being killed because of it. And I appeal to the people here who are diplomats. Look at the fact that the IDF hasn't gone into Bethlehem yet or into the UNRWA camps in Jerusalem. Those are filled with weapons. I ask you to please, also members of Knesset, I'm sorry I'm speaking in English, ask for accountability. Why is the army not confiscating why is there not an order from the foreign ministry to confiscate the weapons? What do I get from the foreign ministry? It doesn't exist. There's something wrong here. There's something wrong here that they're saying it doesn't exist, and this is a life-threatening situation to all of us. And that's very important. And last but not least, a constructive thing, there was something called the U.S. UNRWA Accord, which was signed 2 years ago under President Biden, which forbids, the American government forbidding the aid to UNRWA unless they would change their school system. Well, we now know that the foreign ministry says, well, you don't have to keep it because we're working with UNRWA on other things. That is not acceptable. So all I can say is there's a lot to be done. And last but not least, look at this from the school book, new school book of the Palestinian Authority. This is a picture of a woman who murdered 36 Jews. And she's featured in this book. We went to New York, showed this to Guterres, the UN Secretary General. He gave an order to UNRWA to pull it out. Well, they put it back in months ago, and we've located all the massacres. What about what's going on here? And the glorification of murder never existed in the school books of Nazi Germany. It does in UNRWA and in the PA. So all I can say is you have a role to play to raise these questions. My friends in the Knesset, I haven't given up on you, but I can tell you that it's when you're asked a question from abroad, it does affect. And I have a copy of my recommendations in English and Hebrew. Happy to share them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. David Bedein.
Behind the scene with David Bedein, January 2024. UNRWA, the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, does not hide the fact that its 30,000 workers act as soldiers at war with the Jews. This is the time to take into account the very origins of UNRWA, initiated by the 1948 UN mediator, Folke Bernadotte, who was a member of the nobility of Sweden, who first conceptualized the inalienable right of return to Palestine, and as a contra to the Jewish aspiration of the return to Zion. The time has come to take off the gloves and to finally define UNRWA as a hostile terrorist organization and to investigate the criminal responsibility of the Commissioner General of UNRWA, Philippe Lazzarini, who bears direct responsibility for the daily discovery of immense quantities of weapons found inside UNRWA schools over the past 2 months. A criminal investigation of UNRWA will focus on its direct involvement in terror actions. All it will take will be for one member of the Knesset to request the research division of the Knesset to gather evidence to present to the UN Secretary General of charges of war crimes committed by UNRWA, that will get the ball rolling. It will be appropriate to get at least one UN UNRWA donor nation to activate the now dormant RWG, the Refugee Working Group, as the UNRWA donors must oversee UNRWA and its $1.6 billion budget, with vast amounts of funds received in cash and remain unaccounted for. In that context, a revitalized RWG would investigate the transparency of $1.6 billion of annual donations from 68 nations and 33 nonprofit organizations. Most of it in cash, so that further money to UNRWA. In that context, a revitalized RWG would investigate the transparency of the $1.6 billion in the UNRWA budget from 68 nations and 33 organizations, most of it in cash, so that further funds to UNRWA will no longer wind up in the coffers of terrorist organizations that actually control the UNRWA treasury. In that context, a revitalized RWG will vet UNRWA employees associated with Hamas, Islamic Jihad, or the Fatah, in accordance with the laws of donor nations that forbid assistance to any terror entity. Since UNRWA does bear responsibility for more than 6 million descendants of Arab refugees from the 1948 war, it would seem appropriate and logical to apply the working principles of the UNHCR, the United Nations High Commission for Refugees, to promote the permanent resettlement of Arabs who are fourth and fifth generation refugees born after the 48 war, who have lived their entire life in what we call refugee perpetuity of refugeehood. The UNRWA, as a policy, has not allowed the resettlement of Palestinian Arab refugees because it would interfere with what they call the right of return. And it should be pointed out that we have examined the law of how the International Criminal Court works. Anyone can apply, can make a claim. You don't have to be a government, especially if you are what we call in Hebrew nogeh b'davar, as if it affects you personally. This is David Bedein reporting from Behind the Scene with David Bedein, January 2024. Thank you.
The European Union is now considering whether to remove Hamas from its list of designated terrorist organizations. Some EU members say that Hamas, which rules the Gaza Strip, has changed its mindset and no longer plans murderous activities. To find out about Hamas today, we went to Gaza. We visited refugee camps operated by the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, also known as UNRWA, which provides aid to the vast majority of Gaza residents. We spoke with Hamas leaders who have taken over UNRWA. We asked Hamas if it had changed its policy of inciting indiscriminate acts of violence. Instead of changing its ideology, we discovered that Hamas is preparing for its next acts of terror. We found that Hamas was recruiting and exploiting 17,000 young teens. Drafted from UNRWA by Hamas, the teens attend war games where they learn how to use lethal weapons.
ما دام
Training children for combat represents a clear human rights violation, as spelled out in the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. Let's watch and listen as Hamas leaders articulate their vision. Let's also hear from the youngsters themselves.
فإن الجنود الأشداء قادمون بإذن الله عز وجل، سوف يرونه في حيفا وتل أبيب وكل مكان من أرضنا الفلسطينية.
إحنا بنعد ونتدرب في هذه المخيمات كي نصبح مجاهدون ونقاوم الاحتلال الإسرائيلي الظالم الذي احتل هذه الأرض والذي دنس هذه المقدسات، وبإذن الحي القيوم سنحررها بإذن الله عز وجل، وسنصبح بإذن الله من القادات المحررين للمسجد الأقصى. وهذه المخيمات تعلمنا منها الجهاد والصبر والتمكين والإيمان وكل صفات المسلمين.
كل عام سيكون في هناك شيء جديد يعني يكسبه هذا المشروع، لنصل إلى مرحلة أن يكون جميع أبنائنا وجميع شبابنا شباب يعني قد محونا الأمية على السلاح إن شاء الله.
تعلمنا كثير في هذه المخيمات زي تفكيك السلاح، الأجزاء المعينة فيه، وخشينا هذه كمان المخيمات إحنا حتى ننهي العدوان الصهيوني من هذه البلد ونصل الأرض المحتلة القدس ونحررها بإذن الله.
المقاومة تعتبرها حماس أساً لإرجاع الأرض وتحرير العرض وتحرير الأبناء وإقامة الدولة وعاصمتها القدس. الميثاق هو مبادئ، والمبادئ لا تتغير ولا تتبدل على مدار الزمان. قررت بأن الكفاح المسلح على رأس الوسائل التي تسترد بها الأرض، وهذا شيء معلوم من الدين بالضرورة.
عشان أتدرب وحلم أن أكون مجاهد عشان هنحرر أرضنا،
وطبعا يعني عشان الأقصى إن شاء الله هنحررها بإيدينا وبإيدين المجاهدين القسام والمقاومة الفلسطينية.
شاركت عشان أكون مجاهد وعشان نكون رجال.
شاركت في المخيم عشان نبقى عندنا وجهية كيف نحارب العدو الصهيوني، كيف نرجع أرض الأجداد أرض فلسطين، ما نرضاش على الأرض فلسطين أن نضلها مع اليهود.
وذلك لابد من تحصين هؤلاء النفوس وتقوية المعنويات بحيث يكونوا أقوياء في الدين، أقوياء في انتمائهم للوطن، أقوياء في انتمائهم أو بانتمائهم للجهاد، ويكونوا عونا للمجاهدين لا عونا للمحتلين.
أصبح مجاهد مقاتل في سبيل الله ولنحرر فلسطين من دنس الاحتلال الصهاينة ولنكون نواة مشروع التحرير القادم بإذن الله.
بحكي لنتنياهو يعلون بقول لهم إن شاء الله سنحرر فلسطين من هذا الطريق، إذا ضلينا على هذا الطريق حنحرر فلسطين إن شاء الله.
دربنا هذا الجيل على كل أنواع الأسلحة وعلى جميع التخصصات، دربناهم على المدفعية وعلى الدفاع الجوي، دربناهم على الأنفاق، دربناهم على الكيماندوز، على الضفادع، دربناهم على كل شيء حتى يعتدلوا ليحاربوا عدوهم بإذن الله تعالى.
لم يبقى إلا حل وحيد، هو أن نقاوم هذا المحتل حتى يندحر مع الأرض الفلسطينية. أي اتفاقية تسوية لا تعدو أن تكون هدنة مؤقتة، ولذلك ما يجري على الأرض دائما كلما انتهت جولة كان الاستعداد للجولة الأخرى حتى يزول هذا الاحتلال.
برنامج حماس ثابت في المنهاج التربوي والإعداد وكذلك في برنامج المقاومة. من خلال هذا الميثاق نقدم رؤيتنا لهذا الصراع مع الاحتلال، نقدم مبادئنا ونقدم آليات التحرير من خلال المقاومة. طبيعة العلاقة بين حماس والأونروا هي علاقة طيبة وجيدة. نحن نحرص على تسهيل وتيسير أعمال الأونروا، ويحدث تواصل في بعض الأمور التي قد يحتاجون لتسهيل الأمور، ولكن الآن كما قلت أن الاتصال المباشر هو مع الحكومة.
نؤكد على أن الكفاح المسلح هو الخيار الوحيد لتحرير فلسطين لا المفاوضات.
نحن نقول أن هذه التهدئة وهي تمثل بالنسبة للمقاوم استراحة مقاتل حتى يتم تحرير أرضنا ومقدساتنا. المقاومة من حقها أن تطور إمكاناتها.
ويعني هذه ثقافة المقاومة يعني متجذرة في الشعب الفلسطيني.
At the end of the Children's War Games, Hamas held a rally to celebrate. Let's hear their call to arms.
هذا هو الجيل الذي يتأهل للتحرير وللنصر وللعودة وللاستقلال. يا ويلكم يا ويلكم يا بني صهيون من هذا الجيل الذي لا يعرف الضعف طريقا إلى قلبه. جيل الحجارة وجيل الصاروخ وجيل الأنفاق وجيل العمليات الاستشهادية.
كما وأتقدم بخالص الشكر والامتنان لجميع من أشرف على تدريبنا في الميدان، حيث تعلمنا الكثير وفي عدة تخصصات منها الرماية والقنص والدروع وغيرها من التخصصات.
فاليوم وضعنا في أيديكم السلاح ولن ننزعه من أيديكم إلا لندرب به إخوانا من بعدكم.
إلى هناك، إلى القدس، حيث التحرير بإذن الله. القدس وحق العودة والأرض والمقدسات. كل التقدير لكتائب القسام التي جعلت من مهامها تدريب هذا النسل العظيم. لم لا؟ أليس هؤلاء هم جيل التحرير وجيل الانتصار؟ كل تحية لكم يا أبنائنا. هذا الجيل الذي استهدف بالتدريب والعناية والرعاية في عمليات كشفية جهادية حركية على تدريب السلاح البسيط الخفيف لنعدهم للمستقبل لكل النوائب التي يواجهنا بها عدونا الغاشم.
As the European Union deliberates the terror status of Hamas, a question remains. Will the EU and UNRWA donor nations consider Hamas human rights violations against children?